All right, so it is now time to get started. So thank you everyone who are joining us for this seminar on CAB Workbench. CAB Workbench is a new feature we released in the Istanbul release of ServiceNow. And I have with me Jason Occolini, the product manager for change management. And my name is Rohan Tyagi, and I'm part of the customer experience team here at ServiceNow. So Jason, if you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so here are our nice pictures. So we will talk about the new feature of CAB Workbench, and Jason will talk more about this feature. If we move on to the next slide, there are a couple of housekeeping items we have today. All attendee lines are muted during this webinar. However, you can ask questions using the Q&A panel. Please do not use the chat box because we will not receive chat, and for us to answer the questions, we are using Q&A panel. So make sure it is not the chat box, but the Q&A panel. At the end of this webinar, you will also receive a survey. Please fill out that survey. It helps us organize our future events. And those who were not able to join us during this session can still watch the recording. This session is recorded. The slide decks will be shipped out. And people who are watching this recording can also ask questions by posting comments on the community page. All right, so who should be attending this webinar? The customers who have either upgraded to Istanbul or those who are new to ServiceNow and have received Istanbul as their first instance. People who are change managers in their organizations or CAB managers or any other change management business process owners. And our partners will get most value out of this seminar. Next, the agenda for today's meeting is we'll talk about what CAB Workbench is in details, why is it built, what was the intent, and who are the people who will get most value out of it, who can use it, and some key concepts that you should know before using CAB Workbench. Then we'll also go into a deep dive demonstration of this feature, how you can schedule, plan, and manage the CAB Workbench. With that, I'll hand it over to Jason Occolini to walk you through further. Thanks.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us today. So we're going to jump right into this. We're going to run through a few slides relatively quickly and then jump into a demonstration. Let's start off with a definition. What is the CAB Workbench? As Rohan mentioned, the CAB Workbench is a feature we introduced in the Istanbul release, and it is a feature dedicated to the CAB function of the overall change process, and it enables CAB managers to schedule, plan, and manage CAB meetings all on the ServiceNow platform. Why did we build the CAB Workbench? In a nutshell, it's encapsulated in that statement at the bottom. We knew we could deliver a better experience than the experience that CAB managers were experiencing using ServiceNow. Historically, customers of ServiceNow, change management customers of ServiceNow, were using one of two platform tools to manage their CAB meetings, and that was either a filtered list or a report of type list. Scheduling was occurring outside of the platform using a standard calendaring tool like Outlook. Things like your attendee lists for a individual CAB meeting occurrence needed to be generated manually and input manually. And then third-party conferencing tools were used to share information for audiences that were remote. So tools like WebEx or Link or Skype perhaps. With the CAB Workbench, all of this can now be done on the ServiceNow platform. Some of the benefits that the CAB Workbench provides over what previously existed. The CAB Workbench will automatically generate meeting occurrences for you. automatically generate agendas for those meeting occurrences, the attendee lists that go along with those meeting occurrences, and we will generate notifications to attendees of those meetings that come in the form of a ICAL event that users can add to their standard calendaring tools, such as Outlook. All of those things combined enable CAB managers to automate tasks that were previously manual functions. Within the CAB Workbench itself, we've got a number of time management aids to keep meetings on track and on schedule. Some of our customers have meetings which are literally hours in length, and there may be attendees that are there to speak to a single agenda item, and the CAB Workbench enables users like that to connect to a meeting, set a notification for themselves, go off and continue their day, and the Now platform will send out a notification prior to their item coming up for discussion so that they know to attend and only need to attend as needed. And then we've taken approvals and turn those into a one-step process for any user who has a current or valid approval record for an agenda item being discussed. All tallied, it brings the entire CAB experience onto the ServiceNow platform. Those meetings are conducted in portals that are built on ServiceNow's service portal technology. And we've added a nice visualization to that CAB meeting portal that enables you to visualize risk factors that were previously only available in an analog fashion. Before we get into the demonstration, a couple of key structures that were introduced as part of this CAB Workbench feature. First and foremost is the CAB definition table. And this table's very similar to a recurring meeting invite. You generate or populate attributes associated with this recurring invitation. A schedule is associated with this CAB definition record, and that schedule, along with that CAB definition and some of the attributes that are defined in it, will generate your meeting occurrences, which come in the form of a record called CAB meeting. The CAB meeting will inherit a number of different attributes from the CAB definition record, and similar to a individual occurrence of a recurring meeting invite in Outlook, you can modify some of those attribute values on an occurrence by occurrence basis. Associated with that CAB meeting will be agenda items. Those are change requests that match certain filter criteria that have been defined within the CAB definition record, inherited in the CAB meeting record, and those that filter criteria is used to not only generate the agenda that will be discussed within that CAB meeting, but also to identify and notify the attendees that will attend that meeting. So who can take advantage of the CAB Workbench? As mentioned, it is a new feature in Istanbul. So first and foremost, it's any ServiceNow customer who has upgraded to the Istanbul release. It is a feature that is available at no additional cost. So any existing change management customer has the right to enable or access the CAB Workbench feature. CAB Workbench will work with any change process. It works with our newer state model, which was introduced in the Geneva release. It will also work with the legacy state model that was available prior to the Geneva release. And it supports multiple levels of review. So if you have a CAB that only reviews items that have passed a prior CAB. The CAB Workbench can support that CAB of CAB concept or multiple levels of review. How do you enable CAB Workbench? For any newer customer whose instance was initially provisioned on the Istanbul release, the CAB Workbench will be enabled by default. Customers who are upgrading to Istanbul from a prior release can enable the CAB Workbench by enabling a single plugin, which is called Change Management-CAB Workbench. And one key role that was introduced to aid in the management of CABs within the CAB Workbench is a role that I prefer to just call CAB Manager. But if you are looking for this role by name, its name is actually SN_change_CAB.CAB_manager. And how I will traditionally locate this in the list of roles is just type asterisk and CAB, and it will be easily located using that wild card. So let's jump into a demonstration, and this demonstration will step through the various steps or stages in conducting meetings. We are first going to look at how we schedule a recurring CAB meeting. We'll then look at how we would plan or groom a meeting agenda for an individual occurrence, and then we'll jump into a CAB meeting portal and see what conducting a meeting within the CAB Workbench might look like. All right, so I am logged in as a user named Kristen Mitchell, who has been granted the CAB Manager role. And as we see the Change Management application menu and its various modules, we will notice a new separator called the Change Advisory Board that has a handful of new modules. The CAB Workbench is a calendar of scheduled CAB meetings. We'll take a look at that in a few moments, but we will start at the CAB definition record, which, as I mentioned, is the record which is analogous to a recurring meeting invite. So this CAB definition record has a number of attributes that are associated with it. First and foremost is a name, the individual who will serve as the CAB manager for this series of meetings. Delegates are any users who possess the CAB manager role who may need to stand in place of our CAB manager if that CAB manager is unavailable for some reason. Perhaps she's on vacation, out ill. These delegates have the ability to host a occurrence in this series on behalf of the CAB manager. CABs often have boards which are comprised of individuals who attend every occurrence of a particular CAB, and we've provided you the ability to associate board members either as individuals or as a group. Rolling meeting window would be the duration of time that we will create CAB meeting occurrences associated with this CAB definition on a scheduled basis. So in this case, regardless of how my schedule is defined, we will only create CAB meeting occurrences out to 90 days total. As time passes, we will use this rolling meeting window attribute or fields to generate additional meeting occurrences, but won't generate any more occurrences than this rolling meeting window defines. You can define a type for the particular CAB, a time zone in which it will occur, physical locations in which the CAB meeting will be conducted. And these are a a link or a reference to the standard platform CMN location table. Conference details enables you to associate various conference details associated with this series. In this case, we are just going to be using a phone bridge because we will be conducting our meetings using the CAB Workbench portals, but if needed, you could always include web conferencing information in there as well. Agenda management is really the section of the CAB definition record which enables you to determine the sort of default agenda and traits that will be associated with this meeting series. Notification lead time is a field that enables you to define a number of change requests to notify users who have set notifications for themselves in advance of their item being discussed. So in this case, if I set this value at 3 and a user joins the meeting, sets a notification for themselves to be notified when their item is coming up for discussion, that notification will be generated 3 agenda items prior to their item coming up for discussion. You've got the ability to define a default amount of time to be associated with each agenda item, and that default can be overridden on an agenda item by agenda item basis, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. And then the condition builder enables us to do a couple of different things. One, it enables us to define a series of attributes to use to pull agenda items into meeting occurrences. These are all fields and field values associated with the change request table. It also enables the sorting or ordering of that agenda based on a number of different attributes. Finally, to generate meeting occurrences for this meeting series, we would associate a schedule with this meeting series. And in this case, this is just a standard CMN schedule and schedule span. And in this case, I've defined this meeting series to occur once every 2 weeks on Tuesday and last a total of an hour. Now that I have my CAB definition record and an associated schedule, we'll see that I have no meetings currently, but I can easily initiate a UI action called Refresh CAB Meeting, which generates meeting occurrences for me. I have now completed the process of scheduling a recurring CAB meeting using the CAB Workbench. Let's take a look at how I might plan a meeting and groom the agenda for that meeting. And we will take a look at the first meeting occurrence associated with this series. Now, as we look at the CAB meeting record, we'll notice that it looks very similar to the CAB definition record. This is not by accident. Similar to a recurring invite in Outlook, we've inherited the attributes associated with the series, but these attributes can be modified on an occurrence by occurrence basis. We've also introduced a couple of fields called meeting start time and meeting end time. These fields are, as the name implies, the start and end of the meeting and are used to populate our CAB Workbench calendar with events for each of our individual meeting occurrences. We'll notice that when we defined our filter criteria in the definition record, that I didn't associate any time values with it. No planned start date, no planned end date. That's because based on our schedule associated with that definition, we've created a time frame in which we will use to pull in change requests with this particular meeting occurrence. And these change requests starting after or on or before are specifically related to the planned start date and the planned end date fields, which have existed in the change request table for many, many years. Note, I've also inherited that time per agenda item value, and we will look in a quick second how I can override that on a case-by-case basis. As far as related records, we see a couple of related lists that are associated with those other two key objects that we talked about in the slides, our agenda items and our list of attendees. We'll talk about agenda items in a moment, but our attendees are pre-populated with our CAB manager and our CAB board. This list of attendees will grow as we associate agenda items with this meeting occurrence, and those list of attendees will grow by users who are assigned to change requests which are associated with this meeting occurrence, or starting in the Istanbul release, change request assignees can define a delegate to attend the CAB in their place. So a use case for this is perhaps a group manager attends the CAB in place of all of his employees who are assigned to fulfill a change request. Those assignees can specify the group manager as their delegate, and that group manager will be invited to the CAB occurrences in place of their employees. Note this attendance column. This attendance column will store the responses of attendees who receive notifications for these meetings. So we'll take a look at the generation of a meeting request to attendees in a second, but when those meeting requests go out, they go out in the form of an iCal event that a user can add to their calendar, and if that user responds to that invitation, we capture that response and update their planned attendance based on the response. And those responses include the sort of values that you would expect from a meeting response. They are attending, they have not responded, they're not attending, or they're tentative. In this case, we will just update a couple of these to aid in our demonstration. Now let's look at our agenda items. And note, I currently have no agenda items associated with this meeting, but I do have this filter criteria and this date range associated, so I can use the refresh agenda items UI action to update the agenda for this particular meeting. When I execute that related link or that UI action, I'm prompted, would I like to send meeting invites to any new or updated attendees? And in this case, I'm going to say no, because I'm going to go ahead and do some planning and grooming for this particular meeting invite. I've made some changes to my CAB meeting record, and those changes are detected, and it asks me, would I like to update the definition so all future related meetings inherit those attributes, or would I just like to update this particular meeting occurrence? In this case, I'm going to just choose to update the meeting occurrence. The UI action executes, and I now have a series of agenda items associated with this meeting, all based on the filter criteria that this meeting occurrence inherited and the date range that we defined or that the CAB Workbench automatically defined for us based on our related schedule. As I look at this agenda, I see that all of my agenda items have inherited the default amount of time that I defined within the definition and inherited in the meeting record. Looking at this agenda, I can easily determine that a few of these items are not going to take quite as long, so perhaps I update those to 3 minutes allocated. I have this item here, which may take a little longer, a little more discussion. That's a pretty important item, so I want to discuss that one second. I've got a couple down here at the bottom that I know are only going to take a couple of minutes, relatively related. So there's my agenda. I've updated some allotted times associated with the items. I've done some reordering based on relevance or the priority in which I want to discuss these items. And I now want to send out notifications to my users based on this groomed and planned meeting. And I can do so by using the Send Meeting Request to Attendees UI action. Assuming all of my attendees are ready for this meeting, we can now assume that we've not only scheduled a recurring meeting, but we've planned and groomed an individual occurrence of this meeting. Let's go see what conducting a meeting may look like. I could go to this meeting in the CAB Workbench from this UI action directly from the record, but let's just go ahead and take a quick peek at the CAB Workbench calendar, which shows us all of our scheduled meetings. Our first meeting in this series was scheduled for May 2nd, and this is the meeting that we groomed. I can select this item, see who the CAB manager is, see when this meeting starts, when it ends, what's its state, and any meeting that has an agenda is available to be opened. When I open this meeting, as the CAB manager, I will see this prominent green Start Meeting button, which enables me to start the meeting. Before starting the meeting, let's talk a little bit about what we see prior to a meeting being started, and it is a series of service portal widgets. Up in the upper portion of this portal, I have what is called the header widget. The header widget includes items such as your overall meeting timer, which we will see start as soon as I click the Start Meeting button. We've got the name of the meeting, its date, its start time, the duration it's scheduled for. We also have an area to document notes for the overall meeting occurrence. And these meeting notes are synced with a field within the CAB meeting record. So any note that I take is automatically saved and stored within that CAB meeting record. I can see who is attending this meeting, and in this case, I am the only attendee, but if others were attending, we would see the power of the platform's presence capability notifying me who was currently connected to this meeting occurrence. I also see the responses that those attendees responded to that meeting invite. And in the case of Don and Eric, they notified us they were not attending. Fred was attending. But needless to say, this widget not only shows you who's currently connected, but the responses that we received from those users. Conference information shows those conference details that we defined in the definition record, inherited in the meeting record. And are formatted to ensure that they always display in a reasonable fashion. When I started the meeting, I had a new widget show up that we call the Current Agenda Item widget. The Current Agenda Item widget is the item which is currently being discussed by the attendees of the meeting. Note that it also has a gauge, and these gauges, it's much easier to see on the item level since it's a more granular period of time, but note, these gauges are color-coded based on overall duration. So for the first 50% of this item's duration, this timer was showing in green from 50 to 75% of the duration. It shows in yellow from 75 to 100% of the overall duration. It shows in orange, and when you've exceeded the allocated duration for either a meeting or an individual item within that meeting, that gauge will display as red. I, as Kristen Mitchell, have an approval record associated with the change that's being discussed. So I see these approve and reject actions. I no longer have to dig through my email to find the approval notification I received. I don't need to dig into the record and find my approval record in the approvals related list. As we discuss this item, I'm able to approve in a single click using the current agenda item widget. Below the current agenda item widget is the pending item widget. And the pending item widget is a number of different filters that determine what displays. And in the case of the default, it shows all agenda items which are pending discussion. Note that the gauges associated with these pending items indicate the amount of time that's been allocated for these items, so I always have an idea in advance how much time's been allocated to a particular item. Also note, as the CAB manager, I have the ability to take any of the items in that pending widget and promote those items to the next item being discussed. If I was an attendee of this particular meeting and not the CAB manager, I would not see this promote action. I would see an action called notify me that would enable me to set that notification for myself that I previously discussed, and then I would be notified the number of agenda items in advance that the CAB manager had determined they wanted those notifications to go out. In the primary portion of this meeting portal, we have a widget within a widget. And by default, this widget will display a view of the change request that is currently in focus. Notice though, as an attendee, I can select any of the pending items, and my view of this service portal will be in context to the item that's in focus for me. If at any point in time I want to follow back along with the CAB manager, all I have to do is select the current agenda item, and I'm looking again at the record that is in focus for the overall conversation within this meeting. If in the assessment of this particular change, I as an approver determine that I'm comfortable with this change, I can approve, I can add comments to that approval record, click approve, and that approval acts on the approval record associated with the change, and those notes are stored within that approval record. I can click next to move on to the next item, and we can talk about some of the other features within this widget within a widget. This view of the change request is based on a view that's defined on that particular record. That view is called the CAB Workbench. You, as administrators of change management, have the ability to augment this view with other information. We've also supplied this pencil action, which enables the CAB to bring up a fully editable view of the change request record and view any and all of its related lists. So in the course of a particular CAB meeting, if the CAB determines a change request needs some form of update or chooses to add a note, they can use this editable view of the record to do so. I called this a widget within a widget because this space within the CAB Workbench portal also will display a contextual change calendar. And this contextual change calendar can be used to display other potential impact or risk factors associated with this change. So at the top of this contextual change calendar, and this contextual change calendar has both day and month views. It's got, standard calendar controls, which can enable you to look forward or back in time, to toggle forward back in time, and then a number of different configuration settings that control which information displays in an event or which related changes display in the bottom of this view. I'm able to see that the change that we're currently discussing, change 39, has blackout schedules associated with it, maintenance windows associated with it, and in both cases, there are multiple schedules that are applicable to this particular CI. I can also quickly and easily see that this change request is scheduled in a blackout window. And as a normal change, my company policy does not allow changes to occur within a blackout window. So I instantly understand that I have a conflict that needs resolution. I can also see that there are changes related to this change at or around the same point in time. These changes may be related because they are associated with the same configuration item. They're assigned to the same assignment group. They're assigned to the same assigned to. All of those standard conflict factors that change management's conflict detection would use to identify potential impact. Knowing this particular change is scheduled within a blackout window, and it's scheduled in close proximity to other changes, I can determine that this particular change, as scheduled, doesn't meet my company's policies. It doesn't meet my appetite for risk. And so within this contextual change calendar, I have the ability to simply drag this particular change to a different point in time and update its planned start and end date without ever leaving the contextual change calendar. Whoops. In the course of making that update, I'm now no longer within the blackout window. I'm kind of in the change window. Let's just define that to be 8 o'clock. And we'll move on. Let's do a quick time check. I think that's about what I wanted to cover in the portals. So these portals, a number of different service portal widgets, pending widget, number of different filter items. We can see all items, which are those items which have been previously discussed, as well as those that are pending discussion. My agenda items allows me as a user to come on in here and quickly and easily filter the items I'm there to discuss. If I choose to set a notification for myself, I can do so there. We can see those items which have been approved. And that is the CAB Workbench in a nutshell. Rohan, do we have some other resources that others may be interested in as we await some possible questions?
Yeah, sure, Jason. Before that, I want to thank you. This is not just an impressive feature, but you did a great demo. I totally understand now how to schedule and manage it. Great. So now I would like to give all our attendees some time to ask questions. They can use the Q&A panel for asking the questions, and I'll take 5 more minutes to walk through some of the resources in addition to this webinar. And in the meanwhile, Jason, you can look at those questions, and at the end of the resources page, we'll start answering those. So let's talk about the community first. That's the most helpful resource I have seen so far. There are so many blogs that, Jason, you have yourself written there, and we are planning to roll out more blogs on not just the CAB Workbench, but in general change management and features and any functional or technical details about the whole change management application. So do check out the community. There's another dedicated space called ITSM Guides. I think that's where you would have been notified about this upcoming webinar. So please do check out that ITSM Guide space. It has all the information consolidated in different segments. So you will find it helpful to navigate through those resources. And discussions. We have a very good, fast response rate on discussions. I mean, you do not always have to open a support ticket to ask us. You can anytime go to the community and ask us any question, and we closely monitor that. Another good resource on the next slide is our documentation, and product documentation, as I have shown you in these screenshots, have some good information about, more detailed information about what tables are involved in CAB Workbench. Any administrator will find this information very helpful. So please do check out the product documentation. Also check the release notes, because in every patch we release after the major family release, every patch has a lot of goodness. It fixes some bugs. We give the details of the bugs which are fixed. You may find your answers already in the latest patch release notes. And likewise, there is a known error portal, just in case you found something that is not working. You may want to check out the known error portal first if we have already addressed that, and then open the support ticket with us if that does not resolve. Okay, so now I think we can start picking up questions, and I see there are a lot of questions here.
There's a lot of questions. We'll get to those really quickly. Let me just back up really quickly. Some top takeaways from what we've talked about here. First and foremost, CAB Workbench enables you to bring the entire CAB meeting experience onto the platform. Schedule once and repeat inherent efficiencies, including the automated generation of meeting occurrences, the agendas associated with those meetings, and the attendees who are required to discuss those items, and then deliver a more engaging experience to your CAB meeting attendees. Anyone who has attended a CAB knows that they're not always the most engaging experience. We're going through a list of records. You know, the CAB meeting portals really bring a little additional interest to that overall experience that we certainly want people engaged in. All right, Q&A. We're going to rattle through this quickly. Rohan, keep me honest on time. I think we're pretty good here. Will this be primarily focused on Istanbul or the new Jakarta release? In full disclosure, what I just showed you was Jakarta, but 99.9% of what I showed you is applicable in Istanbul. Some key differences: that recurring meeting window field was labeled differently in Istanbul. It was something like create meetings for. That's a minor change. Everything that is different in Jakarta is a minor change. The agenda timer in the agenda-related list was there previously. We've just exposed it in Jakarta. So while I did show you Jakarta, literally 99% of what you saw is applicable in Istanbul as well. Michelle, can you have multiple CAB workbenches? You can have as many CAB definitions as you want, and each of those CAB definitions can have unique criteria associated with them. So if you have regional CABs, if you have geo CABs, if you have CABs that roll up to other CABs, you can create as many definitions as you want and have as many meeting occurrences associated with those definitions as you would like. Let's see. Can the owner of the change module process configuration use the CAB Workbench to a specific group or role? My recommendation there is to leverage the out-of-the-box role CAB manager to define your CABs and manage your CABs and to assign that role to any user who will be leading a CAB. And that last point is a really important point because only those users who have been assigned the CAB manager role will see that start needing action and be able to actually start the CAB meetings themselves. Let's see. Is this still planned to be domain aware in the K release? Wow, Sharon is ahead of the game. The short answer is yes. If you dig into the schema of these objects, you'll see that some of these key objects extend the standard CMN schedule table. That CMN schedule table is not currently domain aware, but will be in the Kingston release. And I can say that because I know the product owner of schedules. How location would be useful? Can you explain one scenario? Well, the most common scenario that I would say is you may have physical locations, defined meeting rooms within the location table that you reserve on an ongoing basis, and you want users who receive notifications to know what room at that facility has been reserved for the meeting. It is not a mandatory field, so it does not need to be populated, but that's one possible use case. Can you have a different schedule by day? Monday, Thursday. Yeah, so we are using the standard CMN location capability. And anything you can define within, I said CMN location, CMN schedule. So we inherit the capabilities that schedule capability provides, and you can certainly have different schedule spans for different days and times. Ed comments that he thinks it's a nice feature to organize other meeting types. Is it possible to select other agenda items besides changes? In the CAB Workbench, no. But what we did when we built the CAB Workbench is we, from the CMN schedule table, we extended that table and created a generic definition table and a generic meeting table. We then extended those generic definition and meeting tables for the CAB Workbench use case. So the CAB Workbench is certainly limited to change requests, but all the foundation is there to create other meeting types. And I know there's some other teams looking at creating meeting types for their specific use cases as well. I love the idea of using the Workbench for things like project status meetings or release status meetings or things of that nature. Are meeting notes aligned to a change record too? Now, the meeting notes widget that's in the portal itself is specifically to that meeting record and the meeting occurrence. If you need to add notes to any agenda item or change request in that meeting, you can use the editable view of the form to do so. Oh, goodness. Is it possible to change an approval from the Workbench? Your possibilities in regards to approvals within the Workbench are Boolean in nature. You can approve, reject. Well, I'm going to catch myself. You can approve or reject an approval, but you can also skip to the next item without making a decision. So the approval or approve and deny is really, or approve and reject is binary, but you do have the ability to skip an item without making a decision. Larry Dillard, there's a common familiar name. Hi, Larry. Can we invite those not part of the system or only those known to ServiceNow? Do they need ITIL licenses to join the CAB meeting page? So I'm going to answer question 2 first. The answer is no. But users who attend a particular CAB meeting will be will be limited by which access rights they have. And so if we think of change management out of the box, you require the ITIL role to see quite a bit of the information in the record. So a non-rolled user's experience within the portal may, at least their own version of the portal, may look a little plain because they won't have rights to view that information. The agenda table is really geared towards users who have a user account in the system. I have to be honest, I haven't tried to add a user who does not have an account within the system. So I don't know the answer to that, but Larry, please feel free to follow up with me on that. I'm happy to test. How multiple approvals can be addressed here through CAB Workbench? So let me talk a little bit about how approvals work today. Any user who possesses a valid approval record for a change will see the approve and reject actions. Those approvals act on the standard sysapproval approver records which exist in the system, and however you define your approvals to work, those will be honored whether you use CAB Workbench or not. So as an example, out of the box, the scheme is really, one person approve, all approve. But you can also define approvals so every approver is required to approve, or a percentage of approvers are required to approve. And CAB Workbench is just really exposing approve and reject actions to those that have approval records, but any a scheme or constraints that you've put in place in regards to approval are honored. Can you prevent a change to be opened during a blackout period? Well, that's not really a CAB Workbench question. You cannot prevent its creation, but using schedules and using conflict detection, which is enabled out of the box, you will certainly know if a conflict exists, such as the planned start date and end date is in a blackout window for the CI specified. Can CAB Workbench save the list of attendees in the CAB meeting? Yes, all that stuff is saved. Hopefully that answers your question, but none of that information goes away after the fact. Those CAB meeting records, all related records to that CAB meeting are retained and are there for audit or historical purposes. You said assignees will be invited. Which assignees? It is the change request assigned to or the CAB delegate that has been defined. All change task owners are not assigned by default, but if your policy requires all change task assignees, those attendees can be added to the list of attendees to be notified. I'm actually interested in that. So anyone who thinks all change task assignees should be added to the attendee list by default, I'd like to hear that. Make this plugin universal so it can be used in any process or for several processes mixed. All the foundation is there to make that happen, and I'll just leave it at that, Ed. Why not specify a date range associated with a CAB meeting date in the definition? So if you mean a date range in which meeting occurrences will be generated, that is totally controllable by the associated schedule. That schedule enables you to define a end point for the meetings to be generated, and if that's defined to, the end of the year, at the end of the year, you will need a new definition to be created, or your definition to be updated and its related schedule to be updated. Can the notify me?
Sorry, we have 4 more minutes, so either we can skim through quickly or we can answer them offline later.
Oh man,
we still have 4 minutes. You can pick a couple more.
I'm going to talk really, really quickly. Let's see, where the heck was I? Send attendees meeting notification. If they are in multiple spots, will they get multiple times? No, they should only receive a single notification for that meeting unless the CAB manager sends multiple invitations to them. When approving in the CAB Workbench, is this individual approval under related? Yeah, I think I've answered that one. No question, but thank you. Thank you, Jason. How does the CAB manager indicate one of the following? Change was discussed and approved, change was rejected with notes, change was conditionally approved. That is all tracked within the agenda item record itself. So as those decisions are made, we capture those decisions made. In the K release, I'm planning on automatically writing those decisions to the CAB meeting notes field. So maybe that'll make you a little happier too, Larry. I think that was Larry. Why doesn't conference details show the location? Well, that's a good question. I can't answer that. It doesn't. You could paste those values in today. Larry's creating enhancement requests for me. Thank you, Larry. Do the calendar invitations get sent out in Outlook compatible form? Yes. You generate a notification, you'll like the way they look. How can I get more information? Well, Rohan helped with that, and I think this presentation is going to be posted. If not, harass me at K17. Angela, I hope you're going. What will drive when the notification to change requesters to tell them their change is about to be discussed? Standard platform notification via email. And it is the number of agenda items. It's not time-based, it's number of items based. Will invite be sent in Form Outlook to attendees? Yes. Does the CAB Workbench require ITIL access? I highly recommend it. Will impacted CIs also display in the CAB Workbench? You're talking about the impacted CI services related list. The answer to that one is no. How do users join the CAB meeting? You've got a couple of ways: from their invitation that they received and accepted in their calendar, from the CAB meeting record, from the CAB Workbench calendar. What does the complete pre-approved changes checkbox in agenda management do? Great question, Kelly. That enables the CAB manager to determine if agenda items that were included in the agenda that were approved prior to the meeting beginning, should those still be part of the overall agenda? What is the significance? I've talked about the location field enough. Within CAB Workbench, we can see change record. Can we also see other records? No. Does this support an easy UI to force the CAB manager to submit a rejection reason? Yes. If someone selects reject, they are forced to provide a comment, which is exactly the in-platform behavior on an approval record itself. How can this be used to replace Skype? Everyone who's attended the meeting can connect to their own version of that portal, and that portal is catered to them. So based on their access controls, as an attendee, I can look at stuff on the pending items list if the CAB manager is boring me. But yes, everyone can join, and so there's no need for a WebEx to display this information, since everyone can see it in their own version of the portal. Can you set the attendee to always attend? No. we require a response, and you guys, from a process perspective, need to require your people to attend. Can you change an approved approval to rejected and vice versa? No, but that's kind of replicating the in-platform behavior. Our ServiceNow change module at Ali, hi Ali, is currently very customized. Yeah, you know what? It's pretty darn flexible, and I'm not going to say that you couldn't possibly do something, but boy, you'd really have to contort yourself to make your process not work with the CAB Workbench. Are all these features discussed mobile ready? My boss used to tell me the portal brings mobile for free, and I'm making fun of him, but yes, in theory, it should work very well in a mobile environment. Tablets, I really expect the tablet view to be the browser or desktop experience, but it should work on a mobile phone as well. If you decide to invite all C tasks assigned to, hopefully it will be an option that could be included in the CAB definition. I like the suggestion, Larry. I'm making notes.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. It's already we're over 2 minutes, and those questions which were not answered, I'll make sure we answer them and post them on the community. So please keep checking that. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, everyone.
It's okay. You can send.